Two farm boys from Missouri killed more men than the entire Barrow Gang and robbed more banks than all the Depression-era outlaws combined. Yet they're remembered as folk heroes. On April 3rd, 1882, one of them was shot in the back while dusting a picture. Think about that for a second. Bonnie and Clyde terrorized America for 2 years and killed 13 people. The James brothers? They unleashed 16 years of terror, took over 20 lives, and stole $200,000. That's $5.5 million in today's money. Yet somehow, Jesse James became a legend while Clyde Barrow became a cautionary tale. By the end of this video, you'll understand 3 shocking truths that transformed killers into American icons. First, you'll witness the cold-blooded bank murder that made them legends, a killing so personal it shocked even hardened outlaws. Second, you'll discover why Pinkerton detectives threw a bomb at their mother's house in the dead of night. And third, you'll learn how a $5,000 bounty led to the most infamous betrayal in American history. But here's where it gets insane. These weren't professional criminals who chose the outlaw life. They were teenagers when the Civil War turned their Missouri farm into a battlefield. How did teenage guerrillas become the most feared outlaws in America? What drove Jesse to shoot a cashier he'd never met before, thinking he was someone else entirely? And why did Missouri's governor publicly declare them outlaws, making them fair game for anyone with a gun? You might think you know Jesse James, the Hollywood version, the Robin Hood of the Wild West who robbed from the rich. But the real story, it's darker, bloodier, and more incredible than any movie could capture. Because the trusted gang member who would betray them for silver was already riding alongside them, waiting for his moment. To understand how Missouri farm boys became America's most wanted, we need to go back to the bloodiest border war in American history. If you're fascinated by the untold stories of history's most brutal outlaws and the blood-soaked birth of the American West, hit that like button and subscribe for more epic tales of frontier justice. Now, let me take you back to war-torn Missouri, 1865. Missouri in 1861 wasn't just divided, it was a killing field where brother hunted brother. The state that couldn't decide between Union and Confederacy became a guerrilla battleground, where murder was currency and loyalty was paid in blood. Into this chaos rode William Quantrill and Bloody Bill Anderson, Confederate guerrillas who made traditional warfare look civilized. Their raiders didn't fight battles, they waged terror. Imagine bands of young men, some barely 16, riding through the night to burn farms, execute prisoners, and disappear like smoke. These weren't soldiers. They were something new and terrible. The James family farm in Clay County became a Confederate haven. When Union militia came looking for intelligence about guerrilla movements, they found Reuben Samuel, Jesse's stepfather, alone. What followed would create a monster. The soldiers strung him up from a tree, not once, but repeatedly, nearly killing him each time before cutting him down to demand information he didn't have. His wife Zerelda, Jesse's mother, was thrown in jail. The farm was ransacked. Jesse was just 16 when Union soldiers came for him personally. They whipped the teenager in front of his family, demanding to know where his older brother Frank was hiding. Each lash across his back carved deeper than skin. It carved hatred into his soul. Picture this: a boy watching his stepfather hang, his mother imprisoned, feeling leather tear his flesh while soldiers laughed. That's how outlaws are born. Frank had already joined Quantrill's raiders. After the torture, Jesse followed. But he didn't join Quantrill. He rode with Bloody Bill Anderson, the most savage of all guerrilla leaders. At Centralia, on September 27, 1864, Jesse got his baptism in blood. Anderson's men stopped a train, forced 24 unarmed Union soldiers off, and executed them all. When Union troops pursued, the guerrillas ambushed them. Over 100 Union soldiers died that day. Jesse, barely 17, put bullets in men's heads at point-blank range. Then something happened that nobody expected. The war ended. But for men like the James brothers, trained to kill without mercy, peace was just another word for unfinished business. They'd learned that violence solved problems and banks held money. The skills that made them terrifying, guerrillas' lightning raids, precise shooting, utter ruthlessness, would make them legendary outlaws. The power dynamics had shifted but not disappeared. Union occupiers controlled the government, but Confederate sympathizers controlled hearts and minds. Men like newspaper editor John Newman Edwards saw the James brothers not as criminals but as resistance fighters. He would craft their legend with every article, turning bank robbers into heroes of the lost cause. The stage was set. Battle-hardened killers with nothing to lose, a population ready to shelter them, lawmen afraid to pursue them, and enough stolen Confederate gold buried across Missouri to fund a criminal empire. But when the war ended in 1865, these trained killers couldn't stop fighting. The James Younger gang wasn't born. It was forged in blood and bound by shared scars. When Jesse and Frank needed men for what they planned, they didn't recruit criminals. They recruited killers they'd ridden with, men who'd proven themselves at Centralia and Lawrence. Cole Younger brought more than muscle. He brought rage. During the war, Union soldiers had burned his family's farm and driven his father to death. Cole stood 6 feet tall, weighed 200 pounds, and could put 6 bullets through a playing card at 20 paces. His brothers followed. Jim, steady and calculating. John, wild and reckless. Bob, the youngest, desperate to prove himself. Each carried grudges worth killing for. The gang's composition shifted like Missouri weather, sometimes 12 men, sometimes 20, always deadly. They weren't a democracy. Jesse led through fear and charisma, Frank through strategy and experience, Cole through sheer physical presence. Members included Clell Miller, who'd rode with Quantrill, the Jameson brothers, crack shots both, Charlie Pitts, who'd choose death over surrender, and Wood Height, Jesse's own cousin. What happened next shocked even hardened outlaws. They brought military precision to crime. Each man carried matched Navy Colts, 44 caliber death dealers, accurate to 50 yards. For distance work, Henry, repeating rifles, 16 shots without reloading. They maintained their weapons like their lives depended on it, because they did. Before each job, they'd drill formations. Who held the horses, who watched the door, who handled the crowd, who grabbed the money. Picture this. February 13, 1866, Liberty, Missouri. The first daylight bank robbery in American peacetime. 12 men rode into town during a snowstorm, their faces hidden by turned-up collars rather than masks. 2 entered the Clay County Savings Association, while the others formed a perimeter. Inside, cashier Greenup Bird and his son William faced drawn revolvers. The take: $60,000 in gold, bonds, and currency. That's $1.2 million today from a single robbery. But here's where the legend darkened. As they escaped, the gang shot down George Wymore, a 19-year-old student at William Jewell College who'd simply stepped outside to see the commotion. First robbery, first murder. The pattern was set. Law enforcement scrambled to respond. Local sheriffs with 6-man posses couldn't match guerrilla fighters who'd spent 4 years perfecting hit-and-run warfare. Federal marshals had jurisdiction issues cross a state line, and they lost authority. Missouri's government, rebuilding after the war, could barely maintain order in the cities, much less hunt phantoms in the countryside. This is where things got personal. Enter Alan Pinkerton and his National Detective Agency. Pinkerton had protected Lincoln during the war. Now he turned his agents loose on the James Younger gang with one order: bring them in, dead or alive. Preference on dead. The Pinkertons had resources, training, and most importantly, they could cross state lines. They also had tactics the James brothers hadn't seen: undercover infiltration, intelligence networks, and patience. Missouri's political divide became the gang's shield. In Confederate sympathizing counties, farmers would hide them, feed them, lie for them. These weren't just criminals to protect. They were heroes, still fighting the Yankees. Every bank they robbed had foreclosed on Southern sympathizers. Every train they hit carried Northern interests. They weren't just robbing banks. They were continuing the war. The gang developed a support network spanning 7 states. Safe houses where fresh horses waited. Doctors who'd treat gunshot wounds without questions. Merchants who'd fence stolen bonds. Telegraph operators who'd delay messages. An underground railroad for outlaws, paid for in stolen gold and Southern loyalty. But the hunters were learning too. After each robbery, the response got faster, the posses larger, the rewards higher. The easy jobs were ending. Soon the gang would need to hit harder targets for bigger scores, taking bigger risks. John Newman Edwards kept his printing press hot, turning each robbery into Robin Hood mythology. His Missouri newspaper portrayed the James brothers as defenders of the downtrodden, forced into crime by Yankee oppression. Never mind the dead clerks and murdered bystanders in Edwards' telling. Every victim deserved it. On a cold December morning in 1869, everything changed. December 7, 1869, Gallatin, Missouri. The frozen streets were nearly empty when 2 riders approached the Daviess County Savings Association. Jesse and Frank James dismounted outside the bank like they had legitimate business. their breath visible in the frigid air. Inside, Captain John W. Sheets worked at his desk, unaware that his past was about to catch up with him in the worst possible way. Sheets wasn't just any cashier during the war, he'd served as a Union officer. More importantly, Jesse believed Sheets was the militiaman who'd killed Bloody Bill Anderson. This wasn't true. Sheets had never met Anderson, never fought at the skirmish where Jesse's mentor died. But in Jesse's mind, poisoned by war and twisted by hate, Sheets represented every Union soldier who'd wronged him. Today, someone would pay. The brothers entered casually, Frank engaging the clerk in conversation about changing a bill while Jesse approached Sheets' desk. Witnesses later described how normal everything seemed until Jesse's hand moved to his Navy Colt. "Are you Captain Sheets?" Jesse asked. When the cashier looked up from his ledger and confirmed his identity, Jesse's face changed. One witness said it was like watching a mask fall away. What followed wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It was an execution. Jesse raised his revolver, looked Sheets in the eye, and pulled the trigger. The .44 caliber ball took the cashier in the forehead, spraying blood across banking documents and December's receipts. Sheets tumbled backward, dead before he hit the floor. The sound echoed through the bank like thunder in a canyon. "That's for Bloody Bill," Jesse said to the corpse. But then chaos erupted. The clerk screamed. Frank grabbed what money he could reach, about $700, while Jesse stood over Sheets's body like he was waiting for the dead man to apologize. Citizens heard the shot and came running. The James brothers burst from the bank to find their horses spooked by the gathering crowd. This is when things got worse. Jesse's horse, a high-strung mare, reared and broke free. He grabbed the nearest mount, which belonged to Daniel Smoot, a local farmer who'd tied his horse outside while conducting business. Smoot ran out shouting about his stolen horse, and Jesse shot him too. The farmer survived, but barely. The bullet passed through his body, leaving him bleeding in the frozen street. The escape turned into a running gunfight. Citizens fired from windows and doorways while the brothers returned fire, their military training evident in how they covered each other's retreat. They made it out of town, but everything had changed. This wasn't a clean robbery. It was murder in broad daylight, in front of witnesses, with a survivor who could identify them. Within hours, the telegraph wires burned with the news. A cashier executed, a farmer shot, the James brothers identified by name. Governor Joseph McClurg had tolerated the gang's activities when they seemed like Missouri's problem, but executing a Union veteran and shooting civilians? This crossed every line. What Jesse did next shocked even his own gang. He wrote a letter to the newspapers, claiming innocence while simultaneously taking credit. He said they'd killed Sheets for Anderson, but insisted Daniel Smoot had drawn first. It was delusional, contradictory, and signed with his own name. Frank reportedly went pale when he saw it published. The governor's response was unprecedented. McClurg didn't just issue warrants. He declared the James brothers outlaws in the medieval sense. They were placed outside the protection of law, meaning any citizen could shoot them on sight without legal consequence. Kill Jesse or Frank James, and you were a hero. No trial needed. The bounty started at $500 and climbed. Pinkerton detectives flooded into Missouri. Suddenly, every friend was a potential Judas, every safe house a possible trap. The easy days of hiding with Confederate sympathizers ended when money made loyalty negotiable. But the James brothers had an ace up their sleeve. John Newman Edwards published Jesse's letter with editorial commentary that transformed the Gallatin murder into righteous vengeance. In Edwards' telling, Sheets had tortured Confederate prisoners, burned Southern farms, and executed Anderson in cold blood. None of it was true, but truth mattered less than narrative. To Confederate Missouri, Jesse hadn't murdered a banker, he'd executed a war criminal. The gang adapted to their new notoriety. They stopped signing hotel registers, avoided towns where they were known, and developed elaborate communication codes. Messages went through multiple intermediaries. Meeting locations were set by references only gang members would understand. They became ghosts who only materialized to rob and kill. Local law enforcement learned to fear them. Sheriffs who got too close found their homes riddled with bullets in midnight warnings. One deputy who'd boasted about hunting the James brothers woke to find his horse's head in his bed. The message was clear: pursue us and die. With blood on their hands and bounties on their heads, the James brothers had crossed a line. The Gallatin murder opened floodgates of violence that would drench Missouri in blood for over a decade. What started as targeted vengeance became a reign of terror that spanned 7 states and left bodies scattered like fallen leaves. June 3, 1871. Corridon, Iowa. The gang hit the Okabok Brothers Bank while the entire town attended a political speech. Jesse couldn't resist the theater after the robbery. He interrupted the speaker to announce they'd just robbed the bank. "You're being told lies by your politicians while thieves clean you out," he shouted before riding off. The crowd thought it was part of the show until they found the banker tied up and $6,000 gone. But then the Pinkertons arrived. Alan Pinkerton sent his best, including his own son, William. They tried everything: undercover agents posing as farmhands, informant networks, even attempting to infiltrate the gang itself. The James brothers' response was swift and brutal. When they caught Pinkerton detective John Witcher trying to pass as a farmhand near the Samuel farm, they shot him through the heart and left his body on the road as a message. April 29, 1872, Columbia, Kentucky. The gang hit the deposit bank in broad daylight, but this time, cashier R.A.C. Martin resisted. Jesse shot him in the head at point-blank range. When citizens rushed to help, the gang opened fire on the crowd. 3 more men fell wounded. The take was only $1,500 they'd killed for pocket change. Then something happened that nobody expected. The gang innovated. Why risk entering hostile towns when trains carried fortunes through empty countryside? On July 21, 1873, they derailed a Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific train near Adair, Iowa. The engine crashed, killing engineer John Rafferty and injuring dozens. They'd miscalculated. The express car carrying $75,000 had been delayed. They escaped with just $3,000 and more blood on their hands. The train robberies became their signature. January 31, 1874, they hit the Iron Mountain Railway at Gads Hill, Missouri. This time, they didn't derail. They captured the entire depot, hung out a red flag to stop the train, and robbed passengers like it was still 1863 and they were Confederate raiders. Jesse personally went through the cars, checking hands for calluses. "Working men keep your money," he announced, "but soft hands empty your pockets." The class warfare theater played well in newspapers, even as they terrorized innocents. But here's where it gets insane. March 1874, Pinkerton detective Joseph Witcher got closer than anyone. Posing as a laborer, he actually gained employment at a farm near the Samuel place. For 2 weeks, he gathered intelligence. Then Jesse recognized something. Maybe the way he held his fork. Maybe how he sat a horse. They found Witcher's body with a note pinned to his chest. This is what happens to detectives. The Pinkertons escalated. They couldn't match the gang's knowledge of local terrain, so they decided to hit where the Outlaws felt safest home. On the night of January 26, 1875, Pinkerton agents surrounded the Samuel farm. Inside were Zerelda, Samuel, Reuben, and Jesse's 8-year-old half-brother Archie. The agents threw an incendiary device through the window. Accounts differ whether it was meant to illuminate or destroy. What happened next defied all logic. Reuben kicked what he thought was a burning stick into the fireplace. The explosion that followed shattered the night. Shrapnel tore through the room. When the smoke cleared, little Archie was dying. His side ripped open. Zerelda's right arm hung by threads of flesh. It would be amputated hours later. Jesse and Frank weren't even there. The Pinkerton raid backfired spectacularly. Even Unionists were appalled. They'd maimed a mother and killed a child to catch outlaws who weren't home. John Newman Edwards had a field day. "Yankee murder of innocents," his headlines screamed. The James brothers went from criminals to martyrs overnight. Sympathy robberies funded their operations as Confederate supporters opened their purses. But fate had other plans. The gang grew too large, too bold. New members lacked the discipline of war veterans. On September 7, 1876, they targeted the First National Bank of Northfield, Minnesota. It should have been easy. A prosperous town, far from their usual territory. What they didn't know was that Northfield's citizens were mostly Civil War veterans too, and they weren't Confederate sympathizers. The approach went smoothly. 3 men entered the bank: Bob Younger, Charlie Pitts, and Jesse. 5 others, including Frank and Cole Younger, held the street. Inside, cashier Joseph Lee Haywood refused to open the safe, claiming it had a time lock. Bob Younger pistol-whipped him. Jesse pressed his revolver to Haywood's temple. Still, the cashier resisted. Then came the sound of breaking glass. Citizens had realized what was happening. Hardware store owner A.R. Manning grabbed a rifle and opened fire. Medical student Henry Wheeler found an old carbine and joined in. The street erupted. Northfield's citizens shot from windows, doorways, behind water troughs. The outlaws, used to terrorizing unarmed victims, faced a town that shot back. In the bank, Jesse slit Haywood's throat, then shot him in the head for good measure. But the safe remained locked. Haywood had lied about the time lock to buy time. Outside, the battle raged. Clell Miller took a shotgun blast to the face. Bill Chadwell dropped with a rifle bullet through his heart. Cole Younger was hit in the shoulder, Jim in the jaw, Bob multiple times. 8 minutes. That's how long the Northfield raid lasted. When the gang fled, they left 2 dead members in the street and multiple wounded. The James brothers escaped on strong horses, but the Youngers, all wounded and riding injured mounts, were captured within 2 weeks. The legendary gang was shattered. Jesse and Frank fled to Tennessee under assumed names. For 3 years, they lived quietly. Jesse as Thomas Howard, a wheat speculator. They might have stayed hidden forever, but Jesse couldn't stop. He formed a new gang with lesser men, Dick Liddell, Wood Height, and 2 brothers named Charlie and Bob Ford. The new gang lacked the old discipline. On July 15, 1881, they robbed a train near Winston, Missouri. When conductor William Westfall tried to stop them, Jesse shot him in the back. Passenger Frank McMillan was killed by a stray bullet. The violence was becoming purposeless, the robberies desperate. This is where legend meets reality. Governor Thomas Crittenden had had enough. He met secretly with railroad executives and issued a proclamation. $5,000 for Jesse James, dead or alive. Another $5,000 for Frank. That's $138,000 per brother in today's money, enough to tempt even gang members. Bob Ford, newest member of the gang, was 20 years old and ambitious. His brother Charlie was already talking to authorities. When Bob met secretly with Governor Crittenden in January 1882, the deal was simple. Immunity for past crimes plus the reward money for Jesse James. The governor asked only one question. Can you do it? Bob Ford's answer would echo through history. I'll get him when his guard is down. Jesse grew paranoid. He moved his family constantly, slept with revolvers under his pillow, and trusted no one fully except the Ford brothers, his newest recruits who seemed so eager to please. On March 23, 1882, Jesse moved his family to 1318 Lafayette Street in St. Joseph, Missouri. He invited the Ford brothers to stay while planning their next robbery. Nobody saw the betrayal coming, least of all Jesse. But then, Bob Ford made his choice. April 3, 1882, started like any Monday at the house on Lafayette Street. Jesse's wife Z prepared breakfast while their children played. Bob and Charlie Ford sat at the kitchen table, revolvers heavy in their pockets, waiting. Jesse seemed relaxed, even happy. He talked about moving to Nebraska, maybe buying a farm. The man who'd lived by the gun for 16 years was making plans for peace. After breakfast, Jesse did something that sealed his fate. He removed his gun belt. For the first time in the Ford brothers' presence, the most wanted man in America was unarmed. His Colt .45s hung on a chair, useless as ornaments. Bob and Charlie exchanged glances. This was the moment Governor Crittenden had paid for. Jesse noticed dust on a picture hanging on the wall, a needlepoint that read, "God bless our home," made by his mother. He grabbed a feather duster and stood on a chair to clean it. His back was turned, both hands occupied, completely defenseless. Bob Ford drew his .44 caliber Smith & Wesson, a gift from Jesse himself just weeks earlier. His hand shook as he raised the gun. 6 feet separated him from $5,000 and infamy. The hammer clicked back, impossibly loud in the quiet room. Jesse might have heard it. Witnesses said he started to turn, but too late. Bob pulled the trigger. The bullet entered behind Jesse's right ear, traveled through his brain, and exited above his left eye. He was dead before his body hit the floor, blood pooling on the carpet Z had just cleaned. "I shot him!" Bob screamed, as if he couldn't believe it himself. "I killed Jesse James!" The sound brought chaos. Z rushed in to find her husband's body, his eyes still open, blood spreading in a widening pool. She fell to her knees, cradling Jesse's head, her screams bringing neighbors running. The children, Jesse Jr., age 6, and Mary, just 3, saw their father dead, their mother covered in his blood. Charlie Ford ran to telegraph Governor Crittenden. "I have got my man." Bob stayed with the body, repeatedly announcing to gathering crowds that he'd killed Jesse James, as if saying it enough would make him a hero instead of what he was, a Judas who'd sold his friend for silver. Within hours, St. Joseph swarmed with reporters, photographers, and gawkers. The authorities put Jesse's body on display, charging admission to view the corpse of America's most notorious outlaw. Photographers sold pictures of the dead bandit. Someone stole locks of his hair to sell. Even in death, Jesse James was a commodity. The Ford brothers were arrested for murder theater for the crowds. They pled guilty and were immediately pardoned by Governor Crittenden, collecting their blood money before angry crowds could lynch them. But public reaction wasn't what they'd expected. Instead of heroes, they were branded cowards and traitors. Jesse had his faults, one newspaper wrote, but he never shot a friend in the back for money. The funeral became a Confederate rally. Thousands came to the Samuel farm where Jesse was buried. John Newman Edwards delivered a eulogy that transformed the dead killer into a martyred hero. Shot down in his own home, unarmed, by traitors he'd befriended. The mythology was already replacing the man. Frank James watched his brother's funeral from hiding. Within 6 months, he'd negotiated his own surrender through Edwards. On October 5, 1882, Frank walked into Governor Crittenden's office and handed over his revolvers. "I want to live as a law-abiding citizen," he said. The trials that followed became circus performances. Despite clear evidence, Missouri juries wouldn't convict Frank James. He was acquitted of every charge. The statistics tell the real story. In 16 years, the James Younger gang killed at least 20 people, bank clerks, train conductors, Pinkerton detectives, innocent bystanders. They stole over $200,000, financing their terrorism with other people's savings. They turned bank robbery from a rare crime into an American epidemic. But the numbers don't capture the fear. For a decade and a half, no bank in Missouri felt safe. Trains added armed guards. The Pinkerton Detective Agency lost more agents to the James gang than any other outlaws. An entire generation grew up knowing that men with guns could take what they wanted, kill who they pleased, and become heroes for it. The gang members met various fates. The younger brothers served life sentences. Bob died in prison in 1889. Jim committed suicide in 1902. Only Cole lived to old age, dying in 1916 after years of Wild West shows trading on his outlaw fame. Charlie Pitts died at Northfield. Clell Miller too. Woodhite was killed by Dick Liddell in a gang dispute. The rest scattered to the winds, some never identified. Bob Ford discovered that killing Jesse James was easier than living with it. Branded the dirty little coward in song and story, he fled Missouri. He opened saloons, traded on his notoriety, and drank heavily. On June 8, 1892, in Creede, Colorado, Edward O'Kelly walked into Ford's saloon with a shotgun. "Hello, Bob," he said, then blew Ford away. O'Kelly claimed he killed Ford for Jesse, though they'd never met. Even Ford's death became part of the James mythology. Jesse James was dead, but his legend was just being born. Jesse James died at 34, but Thomas Howard, the quiet family man he'd pretended to be, never existed at all. What survived was neither man nor monster, but something uniquely American. The outlaw as hero, the killer as celebrity. John Newman Edwards had won. His propaganda transformed a murderous bank robber into Robin Hood of the Plains, a myth so powerful it overwrote reality. The noble outlaw formula was born in Missouri dirt. Take a killer, add a cause, mix with media sympathy, and watch America fall in love with its demons. The James brothers didn't rob from the rich to give to the poor, they robbed from everyone and kept the money. But Edwards crafted a narrative where every bank they hit had foreclosed on Confederate widows. Every train they robbed carried Yankee gold. Truth became optional when legend paid better. Consider the body count. Bonnie and Clyde killed 13 people in 2 years and died in a hail of bullets, remembered as Depression-era monsters. The James brothers killed over 20 across 16 years and became folk heroes. The difference? Timing and mythology. Jesse rode when the lost cause needed martyrs, when Confederate Missouri sought heroes who kept fighting after Appomattox. Frank's transformation proved the power of the legend. The same man who'd murdered cashiers reinvented himself as a race starter at county fairs and doorman at a burlesque theater. He charged admission to visit the James farm, selling tourists the outlaw experience while his victims lay in unmarked graves. When he died in 1915, newspapers called him a respected citizen. Think about this for a second. Bob Ford killed one man and was damned forever. Jesse killed dozens and was glorified. Ford's sin wasn't murder but betrayal, breaking the outlaw code that even killers deserved loyalty. When Edward O'Kelly gunned down Ford, he became a hero for avenging a man who'd murdered innocents. The moral inversion was complete. The James Gang created the template every American outlaw followed. Rural origins, us versus them mythology, media manipulation, and violent death. Dillinger studied their bank robbery techniques. Bonnie and Clyde copied their publicity methods. Even modern gangs invoke Jesse James when they claim social justification for crime. Hollywood amplified the legend. Dozens of films portrayed Jesse as a wronged hero forced into crime by circumstance. Each retelling moved further from truth. The teenage guerrilla who executed prisoners became a reluctant outlaw protecting his family. The man who slit Joseph Hayward's throat became a gentleman bandit who kissed ladies' hands. Ask yourself, hero or monster? The answer reveals more about America than about Jesse James. We mythologize outlaws because they embody our conflicted relationship with authority, our romance with rebellion, our fascination with violence wrapped in principle. Jesse wasn't Robin Hood. He was a killer who found good publicity. Two farm boys from Missouri changed America forever, not through nobility, but through blood. They proved that enough violence, mixed with the right narrative, could transform murderers into legends. They showed that in America, you could kill your way to immortality if you picked the right victims and found the right storyteller. The dusty picture Jesse cleaned on his last morning still hangs in museums. God bless our home, stained with the blood of America's most famous outlaw. The blessing and the blood tell the whole story. In death, Jesse James finally won his war, not against the Union, but against truth itself.